Thank you for joining me today here on American Drill. I have a comparison video for you. I have two Army Sport reproductions. I have an 1861 Springfield as well as an 1853 Enfield. So at a momentary glance, these are both rifle muskets and they look pretty similar, though there are some very big differences between the two. We're going to go through this today and maybe help you decide which one you should get over the other, and from a historical context, which one probably served better than the other. So the first major difference between the two is the metal itself. So on the 1853 Enfield, you're going to find that the trigger guard, as well as the butt plate and the cap on the end of the gun is all made of brass. So the benefits of it being brass is it doesn't rust on you, it only corrodes. So as long as you take some brasso to it every once in a while, it'll stay looking shiny. On the Springfield, everything is steel. So the metal on the trigger guard, as well as the butt plate and on the end cap, is all just in the white steel. So it rusts, but you don't have to deal with the corrosion as on the brass. So between the two, I don't really think there's a big advantage between brass or steel. Here in Florida, it's more humid, so I think the brass is a little bit better than the steel is because it's more prone to rust where I live. But overall, I don't really see a main difference between the two. The big difference for me as a shooter as well as a reenactor is that the Enfield comes blued. So if you notice, all of the barrel parts, the barrel bands, the slings, and the trigger itself is all blued. The screws are also blued as well. So everything on this gun is blued. The only thing that's not blued is the ramrod. So having it all blued, especially reenacting when you're out in the field and it can be wet and it's sitting out under an open tent all night, is they don't rust. You'll get some surface rust here and there, but as long as you just take an oil rag to it, it'll wipe right off. It's easier to take care of, and it's nicer to deal with. The Army Sport, on the other hand, the 1861, it has, everything comes in the white, and this is historically true. So if you notice up here near the hammer and on the barrel, you might be able to see in the video, it might be hard to see, but it has a lot of already pitted rust. I bought this gun used, and the owner before me didn't take quite as good care of it as I would have liked. However, if you go to any reenactment or any long-time shooter, you'll find that they have some bits of rusting on them, just because in the white, especially here in a humid environment, they're going to rust up quicker than you can count to 30. The rest of the gun is in pretty good shape. It's that nice bright silver. The ramrod also has that rusting on it. So overall, it's a benefit that the Enfield has the bluing. And so for my first two comparisons between the metal itself, I'm going to have to give the edge to the Enfield. So the next main difference between these two rifles is in the rear sights themselves. So the Enfield has a nice graduated rear sight, which goes from 100 out to 400 on its first adjustment, and then the latter goes all the way out to 1200 yards. So for a modern shooting application, this is very nice. I can go to the range, I know my target is at 200 yards, I just simply set my target sight to where it needs to be, and I don't have to worry about holding over or under. I just pull the trigger and I'm probably going to get a hit. So when you're at a nice range setting and you have the time to adjust these sights, they're quite nice. For historically speaking and for the American Army, this was not the best sighting system. The British, when they would give a fire command, they would say enemy at, for example, enemy at 200 yards. The soldiers would put their sighting system at 200 yards, and then when they were told to aim, they'd hold there and then fire. The American military, we didn't give a range estimation before the fire command. It was simply just point and shoot. So you'll see that the sighting system on the Springfield is a tad bit different in that regard. So on the Springfield here, you'll notice it's a much simpler sighting system. We have a simple 100 yard, 300 yard, and 500 yard sight. So the 300 and 500 just flip up, and you just hold over as you need to on those. So the benefit for this, historically speaking, is when you're in the middle of battle, you're not going to know what your actual enemy's distance is. You just have a rough estimation. So all you have to do is just flip up the closest sight, hold it center mass, pull the trigger, and you'll probably get a hit. It might hit a little bit higher on him, might hit a little bit lower on him, but you're going to probably hit the guy. Also, you don't have to worry about having this slider moving around. These nice stiff graduated sights, they're not going to get bumped around, they don't fall over nearly as easy as the ladder does. And a 500 yard sight is probably the most reasonable thing you're going to get. The chances of you seeing with iron sights and getting an accurate shot at 1,000 yards or even anything at more than 600 yards is quite rare. That doesn't mean that people didn't do it in the Civil War. There were certainly long-range shots that took place, but for the average soldier, taking a shot beyond 500, 600 yards, even today, is a very difficult thing to do. So having a only up to 500 yard sight that's very simple and easy to deal with, I think was a very smart decision by the U.S. military. But again, for monitoring shooting purposes, most of the time, if you're at the range, you know what you're shooting at. So for the sights, I'm not going to say that anyone's better than the other, because they each have their purpose, and I'm going to put this one down as a wash. So the next major difference between these two that I have found that's actually useful is the ramrod itself. So on the Enfield ramrod, you'll see there's a slot inside of the, just past the actual cupped part of the ramrod, that you can put a cleaning patch through. I actually like using this a lot. When you use just a simple screw-on threaded eye, it doesn't get as close to the bore size as I would like. So the nice thing about having this slot in the ramrod is you can put a cloth through there and it'll add a very nice seal against the bore, and you can get a lot of fouling out easy. On the Springfield, it doesn't have this, it's just a simple cup. So for most people it doesn't really matter. Most people just use a screw-on attachment onto the threaded portion here at the end. But I like having the option that you do on the Enfield, and I certainly find it a lot easier to clean with on the Enfield. So for that purpose, I'm going to have to give the Enfield ramrod a slight edge. Another considerable difference between these two is the slinging system. So here on the Enfield, you'll see that it has the sling swivel set up at the trigger guard, and then all the way here at the front band. So that makes for a very long sling. It's a 3-band sling, which, to be honest, doesn't have much use for an American perspective, or for just a simple shooting perspective. The reason why the British adopted this was so that you could sling it across your back and use it for scaling. I understand why they did this. When the British military was serving in places like Africa and Crimea, if you're going to be climbing over forts or over rocks and mountains, having this sling set up to where you can sling it across the back and keep it out of the way so you can use both your hands, it makes sense. For the American perspective, they used a two-band sling. So it only goes from the trigger guard over here to the second band. The benefit of this is that you can easily sling it over your shoulder from the shoulder arms position that the United States military had. So it's much easier to carry in the field. You can put it across your back. It's not as comfortable as the Enfield is, but overall I think that the 2-band system is far better. I honestly can't find a good application for this. When you do carry it just on your shoulder like you normally do any other rifle sling, it scratches up. It scratched up my cartridge box. It just bumps into you a lot. It only hangs a couple, like maybe a foot off the ground. The Springfield 2-band keeps it a lot higher. It still keeps it out of the way. It's just a lot easier to deal with, and for basically any purpose, reenacting or live shooting, hunting, whatever you do with it, this is just a better slinging system. So the Springfield definitely gets the edge on the sling system. So the next main thing we're going to talk about that is specific to these guns historically and mostly as a reproduction. So the Springfield comes in 58 caliber. So if you actually take a caliber to the bore, it is .58 caliber. The Enfield is a .577 caliber. So for all practical applications, they're the same caliber. I still use a .575 grain caliber mini ball. That's 500 grains. That's what they use throughout the Civil War. So from the ammo perspective, they'll both shoot it. The Springfield will last longer because of that slightly bigger bore size. It takes a little bit more fouling to block this thing up. So for long-term firefights, the Springfield's a little bit better. The Enfield, since it does have a slightly smaller bore, is useful for accurate shots, initial shots, but it does foul easier just because it is a little bit smaller. They still take the same ammo, they still shoot them just fine. So on the actual caliber side of things, it's pretty much negligible, in my opinion. Simply because from an American perspective, we're shooting the same mini ball out of both of them. The British have their own special mini ball for the 5.77, but American speaking, it's about the same. Now, the main difference that actually does affect these two as a reproduction is the rifling twist. So for whatever reason, Army Sport made this a 1 in 48 twist on the Enfield. I don't know why. That's not historically true. It was a 1 in 72 twist on the original Pattern 53. They only knocked it down to 1 in 48 on the Pattern 58 naval rifle, I believe. And so it's not historically accurate for this thing to be a 1 in 48 twist, but it does make it an accurate shooter because it is a better twist rate than the 172. Out of a 3-band rifle, it's kind of hard to tell, but it is slightly better than the original 172. The Springfield reproduction, again, I'm not really sure why they did this. I believe that the Springfield, again, was also 1 in 72. I could be wrong. But this one is a 1 in 66 twist, which, again, with a 3-band rifle, it doesn't affect it that much just because you have such a long barrel, and the mini ball is just such a large and heavy ball that you can't really have a very high twist rate to stabilize it. But it does make a slight advantage to the Enfield for it to be a slightly smaller barrel with the 148 twist than the Springfield's slightly larger barrel with a slower twist weight. So the Enfield does have a little bit better accuracy from like shooting bench rest at a range, but in a battlefield application, they're pretty much the same. So I'm going to give a slight edge to the Enfield, but for practical purposes, when you're shooting it in the field, you can't really tell much of a difference between the two. So the next thing that'll impact you, whether you reenact or live shoot, is the disassembly process. So when you take apart these guns, the way I clean it, and I'll have a cleaning video in the future, is I completely take the thing apart. I take out the lock plate, take out every screw, take out all the barrel bands, and take everything apart. I clean down everything because when you are loading these things, fouling can get anywhere, especially the Springfield, how it rusts so easily. And with reenacting, you're field cleaning with hot water instead of the mixture that I use to clean, which is a witch's brew. You'll see that in the cleaning video. So water can get places, moisture in the air, it'll rust pretty much anything. And so when you clean these, you want to take them completely apart. So when it comes to cleaning the Springfield, it is easier to clean the Springfield than it is the Enfield. The disassembly process is the same for the two. You still have to take off all of the barrel bands. You then need to take out the top tang screw right here. And then on the back side, there's 2 screws which you have to take out. This is the same on both of them. I'll show you the Enfield in a second. There's 2 screws on the bottom of the Springfield's tang here. There's 3. Actually, there's only 2 on the Enfield, but there's a 3rd screw on the butt plate. On the Springfield, there's only 2 screws in the butt plate, and there's no pin inside of the lock plate. On the Enfield here, it's a little bit harder to take off the barrel bands because they require a screw. So it requires a screw to get these barrel bands off. There is a pin right here inside of the lock plate. You might not be able to see it. There's a small little pin right there that you have to pop out with a punch to be able to pull off the trigger guard, which can be a pain, and it requires you to have another tool for disassembly. Getting off the butt plate, there's a 3rd screw up here. There's a screw right here, and then there's 2 on the back of this over here, as you can see. So you have an additional screw to get out of the butt plate. So overall, the Enfield's a little bit harder to disassemble than the Springfield is because you have to have that additional punch, and you also have to take out more screws to get it apart. So for that reason, I'm going to give the Springfield an advantage for reenacting and shooting. It's a little bit easier to take apart, although not by much, and yeah, it's just easier to deal with. So the next and probably the most important difference between these two is in the nipple design itself. So on the Enfield, you'll see that the side is flush here, and that's because the nipple channel in the Enfield is a straight 45 into the bore. So the explosion from the cap doesn't have to make any hard turns like it does in the Springfield, as you'll see here in a second, and it's just a much better design to have it go straight into the bore. The Springfield here is just, it's not a very good design. The only reason they designed it this way was for manufacturing purposes, and it causes a lot of issue for both reenacting and live shooting. More for reenacting than live shooting. The screw here is put in because the nipple makes a 90-degree turn. So when you fire the cap, the explosion has to go down here and it turns and goes into the bore. That 90-degree turn creates a corner right here where that screw's at, which collects fouling and causes this gun to misfire. Anybody that reenacts carries a nipple pick, especially if they are a Springfield shooter, because these things will misfire. Just when you're shooting off that many blanks, it's going to have some fouling get caught in there, and it's going to cause you issues. When you're live firing and you're not shooting that much and you're cleaning it regularly, it's not as big of a deal, but it certainly impacted the reliability of these guns in the field. And for that purpose, the Enfield has a significant advantage over the Springfield. I didn't mention this screw in the disassembly process, which is one other thing you do have to do on the Springfield for cleaning than you do on the Enfield. But it's a very easy screw to take out, and overall the Springfield is still easier to take care of than the Enfield is. So another difference between these two that it's hard to notice unless you've used these regularly is the half-cock position itself. So here on the Enfield, when you put the gun in the half-cock, you can see you have a nice generous space between here and the nipple, which allows you to get a cap in here much easier, and it's easier to get your finger under here to clean out any debris or issues that you have. And when you pull the full cock, it's a nice simple click back, and the full cock is, you'll be able to see a difference here with the Springfield and the Enfield. It's about the same between the Springfield and the Enfield where the full cock actually is. On the Springfield, the half cock is much closer to the nipple. So when you pull it in the half cock, it clicks much sooner, and the space you have here to work in is much smaller. When you're reenacting particularly, and you're trying to make fast shots, it's harder to get a nipple, a cap onto the nipple, because you don't have as much space to work in as you do in the Enfield. So when you're trying to handle those very small little caps, especially in cold weather, getting your finger in here is a bit of a pain. And when you pull it back to full cock, you'll see it's about the same as the Enfield is. They have about the same fall distance. So the main difference between these two is the half cock, and the Enfield has a better half cock in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, than the Springfield does, because it's easier to work with, and so I'm going to give it an advantage to the Enfield when it comes to the half cock position. The final comparison we're going to do between these two rifle muskets here today is the buttstock. So here on the Enfield, the first thing you're going to notice is that the butt cap itself isn't curved like it is in the Springfield. It's nice and flat. And the buttstock, you don't really notice it, but it is there. The stock drop off on the Enfield is a little bit less than it is in the Springfield. So that's the drop off from here on the comb and the stock itself from the bore. So the drop off's a little bit less than the Enfield. I've read this online and people complain about it, but honestly I've never had a problem with it. You do have to get your head down a little bit more on the stock to see the sights on the Enfield. It doesn't bother me, probably because I've shot an Enfield longer than I have a Springfield, but it's really non-issue to me. You just get your stock, you just get a good sight picture. You have to get your face on a little bit lower for it, big deal. And there's no big difference for me personally between the stock drop off, but it is something that some people complain about. So if that is a problem for you, then that's something to consider. The Springfield, you'll notice that the butt cap is curved here. So it's got a nice little curvature to it, which the Enfield doesn't. Again, I don't really prefer one over the other. So if you do, that's something to consider. The Springfield stock drops off a bit more than the Enfield does. It might be hard to see here on camera, but the drop off from here to the bore is a little bit more. So it is a little bit easier to get your sight picture, but as I said, once you've shot it a bit, you don't really notice it that much. So between the two stocks, I personally say it's a wash. So overall, that's going to leave us at a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the Enfield advantages, and a total of 2 for the Springfield advantages. So as you can see here, the Enfield's got more going for it. Well, as you can see from the chart, the Enfield has beaten out the Springfield in its differences. I think the Enfield is overall a better weapon than the Springfield is. During the war, the Springfield was the more issued gun and was used more by both sides, mainly because the blockade to get the Enfields in made it difficult for the South, and the Springfield, obviously being produced in America, was going to have a bigger showing on the battlefield than the Enfield ever was. From the soldier's perspective, I've heard it either way. I've heard that some soldiers like the Enfields. I've heard that some of them like the Springfields. The Springfields have interchangeable parts, which the Enfields don't, historically speaking. The Springfields also have those simple battle sights, whereas the Enfield you have to fiddle around with it. So historically speaking, I would probably take the Springfield in the battle, just because it'd be easier to take care of in the long run. It's easier to find parts for it. The sights are better suited for a battlefield condition. And cleaning wise, everybody was using fire ash, so the blue wouldn't last long on the Enfield. From a modern standpoint, I would take the Enfield every day. The Enfield, the combination of the fact that it's blued, it has that nice HalfCock space, the nipple is straight into the bore. It just overall makes it a more reliable gun and an easier gun to maintain in a modern sense than the Springfield is. The Springfield rusts far too easily, it jams too easily because of that 90-degree bore, and it's slightly less accurate, like I said, but it's not that noticeable. So overall, considering that they're about the same price and it's coming from the same company, I would choose the Enfield. Also because I'm a Floridian and my company was issued from my area, the company that I was a part of was issued Enfields historically in 1862. That's one of the reasons I got the Enfield first. So I can't say enough good things about either one of them, but from a modern shooting perspective, if your company doesn't have a particular choice for either one of them for reenacting purposes, or if you just want to have a nice weekend shooter, I would highly suggest the Enfield versus the Springfield. Thanks for joining me here on American Drill, and I'll see you next time.